Welcome to the Bulldog Owners Podcast, where I host a passionate conversation about pedigree dogs. I'm Sarah, and here we cut through the myths and misinformation to talk honestly about life with Bulldogs. Before we get started, I want to set a little context for this episode. What you're about to hear is a short extract from a much longer webinar that I hosted with Isabel, the canine nutrition coach, who genuinely blew people's minds on the night. If you're a member of the Bulldog Owners Club, you'll have access to the full session, but this particular section, around 25 minutes, is the part where everyone suddenly went quiet, started scribbling notes, and I knew they'd want to come back and listen again. It's also a really good reminder that people like Isabel exist for a reason. Thoughtful, well-educated professionals who specialise deeply and help dog owners like us ask better questions and make more informed decisions rather than automatically defaulting to advice that isn't as nuanced or breed-aware as it could be. Let's dive into the presentation.
What's really important to take away from this slide is actually think about how your dog food's been made. With kibble, essentially, the ingredients had to have been ground down. They had to have been heated. When protein is heated for long periods of time to be able to then make it into the shapes and stuff, it loses a significant amount of its nutrients. So the only way that they can then make sure that food is up to the standards of those guidelines is to add supplements and nutrients back in. So they're generally from synthetic places, not always, but particularly cheaper companies. So you're then adding synthetic supplements back rather than just feeding the dogs the real thing in the first place. They have to be pressure extruded generally, which basically means the food's put in under tons and tons of pressure to make it those tiny little shapes. And at the end of the day, particularly from the brands that like to use cheaper ingredients, things like that wouldn't taste very nice, you've then got the fats sprayed on at the end. Now, the fats that are sprayed on at the end are the worst kind of fats, because that is the equivalent of going around McDonald's at the end of the day before it's been cleaned and essentially scraping all of that fat off all those various different cookers and then chucking it in, because that is where the fats come from for them to be able to spray them back on the cheaper brands of kibble. That is not the case with the better quality brands of kibble, because actually for the best brands of kibble, they're using whole chunks of meat, they're boiling and cooking that down themselves, and then they're collecting their own fats off the top to then spray back on at the end. So that's what's saying you do see this massive range in kibble, I think more so than other sections of manufacturing. The next is wet food. Again, you can see a whole different range in that's been sort of jellified and made wet. On the other hand, to cooked, pressurized natural foods that have then just been sterilized by using the pressure and put in a can, essentially. So you've got, again, two different extremes of your wet food. Cold pressed, again, but instead of the ingredients undergoing so much treatment, they're just ground down, added to water, and then pressed under really cold temperatures to form the pellets. Freeze dried does what it says on the tin. Generally, it's very natural products that have just been pressurized in a vacuum. The reason that is a great method is by doing that, they're not applying heat. And by not applying heat, you don't lose a load of nutrients, which then means you don't need to add synthetic vitamins and nutrients back in, which means it's less processed. Freeze dried also maintains flavour, so you would never have to spray fats back on a freeze dried type of food. Finally, obviously, exactly what it says on the tin, you've got fresh food. Typically, that's generally cooked or steamed. There's a lot of adverts on TV at the moment for various different brands that offer a fresh food, and then obviously raw food. Now, it's a sliding scale, and I wish I could have designed a better graphic that showed you more fairly the range in every single different type, because you've got kibble, as I said, that's awful right up to really good kibble. You've got the same in the wet food, the cold pressed, the freeze dried, and everything else. But on the whole, and when I say what's accessible, if you went to the average pet shop and you picked up the average type of each one of these foods, you're going to see a sliding scale of what is ultra processed and the worst quality in terms of what your dog's going to be consuming, up to the least processed. And at the end of the day, for those of you that have been watching the news a lot, and you'll have heard the rising concern that surrounds ultra processed foods. So we've heard a lot recently. It's no different in humans to what it is in dogs. We've seen a massive rise in obesity, diabetes, cancer, tumour-related issues, thyroid-related issues, and they can all and have been proven to be caused by ultra-processed foods. So it's really important to consider that just because your dog is okay today on something that's ultra-processed as a diet, consider actually after a certain number of years, their chance of cancer does go up by being fed entirely on an ultra-processed diet. So this scale here just shows you the range of how much process those foods have gone through to get to your dog's bowl. So it doesn't mean that necessarily the ingredients are bad or good. It just means how much have they been cooked and faffed with. And that is what relates to ongoing health issues and chronic health conditions. So in essence, what I'm saying is you don't all have to jump to the green one. You don't all have to feed raw. Not at all. Absolutely not. That's not what I'm saying. And that's not realistic. It doesn't suit everyone, doesn't suit every dog. But actually what I would say is if you feed 100% kibble, that is ultra processed, even if it's great ingredients, good job, because that is already making it 10 times better than a poor ingredient kibble. What I would challenge you to do is even increase the amount of non-processed food in your dog's diet, even by 20%. One meal, maybe 2 meals a week, or a bit here and there, like use something as a topper, and try and pick something from a lesser processed category. Or if, for example, you feed wet, why not add in some cold pressed or some fresh food or the odd bit of raw food here and there? By essentially watering down how much ultra processed food you give and increasing the amount of unprocessed food, you reduce your dog's chance of cancer, diabetes, and all of the other really nasty things that limits our dog's health span, basically. So you don't have to go fully raw. That's not what I'm saying at all. And ingredients are as important as processing method. But I just wanted to sort of show you these two things, sort of in comparison, that ingredients are important, but so is the manufacturing method. You need to pair the two together, and then it will enable you to actually understand what is going in your dog's bowl. And if you are having recurrent itchy ears, you are having sore paws, you are having hot spots, you are having sloppy poos, bad gas and things like that, it's probably likely due to the diet that your dog is on. And by either trying to look at improving the ingredients I mentioned earlier or improving the manufacturing method, you should see an improvement in their condition. Obviously, it's not always quite that simple. And that's why people like me exist, is so that we can help you with your dog's specific issue. But it gives you a really, really great starting point. As I said, I challenge you guys to just increase your dog's intake of unprocessed food by just 20% a week even, because you will see a benefit in your dog's long-term health for sure. Just because I think this highlights everything and brings it together quite nicely. Here are some of the most common sort of brands of food that I see and talk to people that they're on, and various different things. So you've got like your Royal Canin, Baker's, freeze dried, Wainwright's there, Pedigree, Bella and Duke, Pro Dog. Some really obvious great brands there, all really accessible. You can just go down to the supermarket on some instances and pick them up from the supermarket. You may not even have to go to a pet shop. Now, if we were to look at what is the processing method and what the ingredients are, we could rank them from what is least healthy to what is most healthy. I think this slide is really important to draw your attention to. So I've ranked them here. This is their ranking against various different guidelines. What we've got is the best food and healthiest food for your dog, right up to the least healthy food. Now, the thing that always shocks people the most about this slide is the second most expensive food is literally the worst food that you could be feeding your dog. It's something that I see a lot of people that are really passionate about their dogs, and I know you guys are incredibly passionate, and that's why I wanted to put this in here. I fall into the same trap a lot of the times when I'm shopping for myself and other people. You sometimes think that price equates to goodness, especially when it comes to food. You think, oh, well, it's an expensive premium brand of food, it must be good. Well, if you look at this slide here, it literally does show you that price doesn't correlate at all to how good that food is for your dog, because you've got the second most expensive and the third most expensive food in the bottom section of what is good for your dog. So do have a look. Price isn't everything. And by adding less processed food into your dog's diet, you're not going to increase your food bill. If anything, what I wanted to put on here was you're probably going to reduce your food bill, but not only are you going to reduce your food bill, you're going to reduce your bill on things like creams, steroids, antibiotics, and vet visits, because you will go to the vet less. The more you feed your dog better ingredients and less processed food, the less your dog will show the symptoms of their gut being imbalanced. Because the gut was designed to eat meat like the wolf. And the further we push that gut away from what it was designed to eat, the more you're going to see that body screaming out for help, which in your body language breeds like your bulldogs, you see really, really quickly, because they show you with their itchy ears and their tear stains and everything else. And they're showing you that actually, do you know what? My body's got too much on it. I can't deal with what's going on, whether that's environmental or diet. And they're showing you through those symptoms. So it's not just a breed quirk that you have to accept, that your dog's going to have itchy feet its whole life. That isn't normal. It's not just because it's a bulldog. You've not got to deal with hot spots your dog's whole life just because it's a bulldog. You can't not sit on the sofa on evening with your bulldog because they're going to clear the room every time they fart. That's not normal. So it's really worth considering that actually make these few changes and you should see massive improvements. Anyone's played the logo game, this one's for you if you enjoy it. But essentially, if you were to identify what all three of those companies are by the logo, I'm going to be very impressed if anyone gets all three right. Has anyone got them, Sarah?
We've got Colgate, Mars. I think one is Nestle.
Yes, yeah, it is. So the reason I put this up here is just to show you guys, and I mentioned earlier, the dog food industry, let me remind you, is worth £25 billion a year. So is it any wonder that some of the biggest brands you could possibly imagine happen to dabble in dog food as well? Who would have thought? So you've got Mars producing things like Pedigree, James Wellbeloved, Royal Canin. You've got Cats, Sheba and Whiskers as well. You've got Nestle that make Baker's, Bonio, ProPlan, Purina, Win-A-Lot, and also Hill's Prescription and Hill's Science Plan. And Colgate, you've also got Hill's Science Plan there behind, and also other way around, Colgate, the Hill's Science Plan and the Hill's Prescription. It's the Nestle that are the Purina, ProPlan, Baker's, etc. So when you actually sit back and think, well, hold on a minute, why are such big brands that produce generally not great things for humans, chocolates and things like that, they are now getting involved in dog food. Now, what I will also mention to you guys is these companies are some of the biggest owners of veterinary providers in the UK. So why is it that they're producing food and they are some of the biggest players in the food industry for dogs, yet they are also the biggest players in the veterinary industry as well? I wanted to leave that with you as a bit of food for thought, because I think when you try and connect the dots, it's quite scary and it's not necessarily something that we want to consider. But what you put in is what you get out of your dogs, and garbage in is garbage out in terms of poo, but also in terms of symptoms and other things as well. So if you are going to your vets that happens to be owned by Mars and you are feeding your dog James Wellbeloved or Royal Canin, by feeding it your dog that its entire life, they've got lifetime value out of you, because not only are you hooked on their food forever, you're going to be at the vets forever as well, and they've got you both ends of the spectrum. So it's just really important that you guys go in, sort of let that mull over in the back of your mind as to who owns the dog food production and why do they own it. I just wanted to really sort of like deep dive on understanding what is in the bowl so that you can then understand where those symptoms are coming from.
And I just wanted to ask about, if you've got a dog that's got apparent toxin issues, and I know you said about any improvement in food is better than none, but would you not recommend like a cold turkey, and go straight to raw and then stabilize the dog and then work backwards to see what those tolerances are, rather than slowly edging closer to? And if it's to go to a raw, what's the best approach? Is it single protein, you stay on that for like 3 months, then you decide you don't keep swapping? And how cold turkey should be cold turkey? Is it like nil by mouth, apart from this bit of meat in this dog's bone? Like, how aggressive should someone be if someone's got a dog with apparent issues?
Very, very good question. So if your dog is already exhibiting symptoms badly and you're thinking, oh, you're miserable, we need to do something about this quick, then yes, my advice would be swapping just 20% of the diet isn't going to fix everything. It's going to potentially cause an improvement, but you're not going to build Rome overnight if your dog is already in that state. If a dog is already struggling constantly and in cycles with any of those symptoms that we mentioned, then my generic advice, not knowing your dog, would be stop presuming you are somewhere on that scale of processing method that potentially may be raw or more likely lower down on the scale, more towards the ultra processed food. I'd say stop feeding whatever you're feeding immediately. Ideally, what you would do is move to a raw. Depending on your dog's digestive wellness, you might need to slowly introduce the raw, but I'm assuming otherwise your dog's digestive system is okay. You would cold turkey swap onto a raw food, being careful not to pick one with a high bone content if your dog's not had raw before. Again, this is when I'd probably this is when I would recommend working with a nutritionist, just to make sure you get it right and you don't make things worse. You'd move over to a raw food. Importantly, you would choose a single source, a single type of protein. As we mentioned with labels being ambiguous and hiding things, there's nowhere to hide with a raw food because it should only be pure meat and pure bone and potentially an additive or two in as much as fruits, vegetables, and that's probably realistically it. So they've got nowhere to hide. So it's really easy for you to look at that label and say, right, I'm going to choose a single type of protein to feed my dog. That dog gets fed exclusively that. Nothing else, no treats, no bonios or anything like that. And you go, oh, it's fine. It's not, it might still be the same type of protein you've picked, but you've got to remember the lower down that manufacturing scale is, the more they can hide in the labels. So you could be giving like a beef treat alongside your beef single source raw, but actually that beef treat has other chicken meal and things like that in it. So cold turkey on everything else, just do your single source raw. And that dog needs to be on that for a minimum of 3 months to see whether or not that is better or worse. If in that time the dog gets worse with no improvement, depending on the situation, sometimes dogs will work the toxins out of their body and get worse before they get better, which is why I recommend working with a nutritionist. But provided you see improvement, then I would keep that dog on there, and then you would slowly start introducing other proteins one by one so that you could essentially work up a list of safe proteins that your dog can have. If your dog gets worse over the 3 months, then you write that protein off as a no, that protein right now isn't safe for my dog. And what's also really important to say is that just because your dog hasn't done well on a protein once in its life, it may not be an allergy. Depending on that dog's situation, if it was already in a chronic state of inflammation, bad ears, bad gut, hot spots and really covered in sores and things, it could just be the fact that the dog was suffering from a really overburdened immune system and that food didn't agree with it at that time. But I would work through all your raws. Once you've then got a stable dog that is well, you can then either choose to stay on raw or move back down that manufacturing scale, but just being very, very careful to select foods that only have safe proteins on is what I would recommend.
Okay. 2 questions come in. Someone said about, please advise the best kibble to mix with raw. Now, there's an argument they should be mixed. And so I don't know if you
So
I don't know if you just want to say whether that should happen or not happen anyway.
Yeah, a lot of people will say don't mix them. The place in which that's come from is the fact that, no different to us as humans, you go and eat a really heavy meal, that's going to take a while to get through your digestive system and you're going to feel potentially a little bit bloated and it's going to take a while to go through you. On the other hand, if you go and eat a salad, that's going to move through your digestive system really quickly. That's a good way of comparing the two for dogs. That raw will move through their digestive system really nice and smoothly and on time. Kibble could take a lot longer to digest. So a lot of people for that reason will say you shouldn't feed them at the same time. I take a slightly more of a balanced view that actually doesn't stop me from having a load of roast potatoes with my broccoli when I sit down and eat dinner. I eat the two together, I'm fine. So provided your dog has had raw before and can tolerate raw well and had kibble before and can tolerate kibble well, in my opinion, there's no reason to say that you can't mix the two. I've no issue with it.
The only reason I put in a bit of biscuit with raw is so the bulldogs can actually pick it up and eat it. Because depending on the consistency of the raw, which can change, as we all know, not just from company to company, but from batch to batch sometimes, of how it's been given to them by their suppliers and whatnot. Sometimes it's just too sloppy for a bulldog to get up and grab. So that's my main reason, and really the only reason why I mix is just to make it easier for the dog to eat. So whenever I add in biscuit, it's generally like just a little bit for texture, not necessarily for dietary reasons.
Yes.
So you have to be careful not to break the benefits of the raw because you're sticking in the biscuit. Gabriella's asked about the best raw that isn't too wet, chunky, hard for a flat face. You have to work your way through them, because even if you'll find a company that you like, you might only like the pork, and then you try the beef and the consistency is totally different, even though they're the same supplier. So you literally have to do a trial and error, in my opinion. Some of them mince them finer than others. That's sometimes a bit too apparent. But yeah, I mean, Gabriella, I like Pro Dog. I quite like Durham Feed. I like Paleo Ridge, but it depends on what ones they are, to how chunky or not. Some of the raw food places, they sell chunks of meat now, don't they?
Yeah. Which is all well and good for a dog that chews, and as we know with a lot of the bulldogs, they don't fancy chewing and they want to gobble it whole. So when I'm advising people to move to raw with bulldogs in general, I'd normally say buy a premix, like you're referring to, like the mint Sarah, rather than going down the route of DIY and chunks, just because so many of them don't fancy chewing. And you don't want to be dealing with a choking dog, because it's really, really not fun. Been there, done that, got the t-shirt.
Yeah, you have.
I have. My dogs are sensible, and it happens to the best of us. So yeah, I would say it's really important to remember the dog you're feeding, as I said, as one of the laws. Feed the dog in front of you. It's not, there's a one size fits all. You mentioned a lot of the brands that I would mention there as well, Sarah. I don't think you missed many of them from what I heard. Dog's Butcher's another one that's really nice and quite medium in texture. I wouldn't say it was fine, but I wouldn't say it was too thick in texture. I'm assuming that's what you wanted, a medium one. From what you said, I couldn't quite tell. So I'd say try the Dog's Butcher as well if you haven't already. I really like that one.
Amazing.
The main thing I would say with probiotics is they're not all created equal. And a lot of again, read the label. So probiotics will very often be sold in two forms, a probiotic only or a pre and probiotic. Because a prebiotic is essentially fibres that, when put into the body with the probiotic, help feed all the good stuff in the gut. Some companies will use cheap, nasty fillers as a prebiotic, as in cheap, nasty fibres. And some companies will use really great natural fibres, like vegetable fibres and types of vegetable in there to add that roughage, basically. So that would be step one, is look at which type you're looking at buying. And if it is a pre and probiotic, just check that the type of prebiotic they're putting in is decent. And the other thing to consider is, what type of probiotic is it? If they can't tell you what strain of live bacteria are in that probiotic, don't buy it, because there could be little to no active ingredient in there at all. They should have a long, complex name as to what type of bacteria you're feeding your dog, and you should know that. So if it doesn't have it on the tin, don't buy it. That's another red flag. And the other thing that I would say is, again, there are different types of bacteria, different categories, and like where the bacterias come from. Favourite of mine with the dogs, and if I was going to say to someone, here's a really generic, nice probiotic, I would tell them to go with a soil-based probiotic, and that essentially means a type of bacteria that's come from the soil. Those as a species and that type of probiotic is a very hardy, very ancient and designed to survive type of bacteria. Because what you've got to remember is, when you're sprinkling on your dog's food or feeding them the tablet, that's got to go from the mouth and the whole way through the stomach and the stomach acid, the whole way down to the gut, because that is where we want it to survive and help the gut bacteria. So if you're feeding a type of probiotic that isn't a soil-based probiotic, it hasn't come from the soil, and it's a more fragile type of bacteria, what are the odds that that's going to make it through the throat, gullet, down to the stomach, through all of that really acidic stomach acid, and out to the place you want it to get to? It's slim. So my generic advice is, love a soil-based probiotic. Just check whether or not it's got crappy prebiotics in. And the other thing that it shouldn't have in, finally, are unnecessary additives. Don't feed a probiotic that's in a biscuit. Don't feed a probiotic that's a tasty chew. The whole point of a probiotic is it shouldn't be tasty. That's not why we're giving it. We're giving it for benefit, not as a tasty treat. So if it's been put into a tasty treat, much like the kibbles mentioned earlier, they've been sprayed with fats and crappy things to make them taste nice. So you're going to undo the benefit that you're doing by giving the probiotic, which is to feed the gut good stuff. So don't feed one that's tasty, got chicken or beef flavours or fish flavours. It doesn't need any flavourings in. It's a powder or a capsule that you should be able to open and mix into your dog's food. Then the food is the thing that makes it tasty. So it shouldn't have starches, it shouldn't have rice flour, it shouldn't have like sugars, flavourings. And it also then doesn't need binders and things to make it into a little bone shape and things like that. So that would be my whistle-stop tour of probiotics.
Isn't Isabel amazing? I think she has a real knack for explaining complex issues and making you stop and think. If you're a member of the Bulldog Owners Club, you can revisit the full webinar and listen to the wider conversation in your own time. And even if you're not, I hope this snippet shows you the value of working with people who really understand dogs and how owners think things through, rather than relying on a one-size-fits-all advice. If you'd like to explore Isabel's work or book a consultation with her, you can find her at caninenutritioncoach.co.uk. Otherwise, thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode of the Bulldog Owners Podcast. Before you go, head over to bulldogownersclub.com if you fancy a bit of support with your dog, help finding a puppy, or joining one of our fortnightly informal chatty community calls.